It said something about recording stopping.
I stopped it because I didn't want that part on the Spotify thing. Starting it again. Yep, starting it again. And we're live. All right, welcome to the Out Loud Podcast, a podcast focusing on LGBTQ issues, also with our flagship Out Loud anthology, written by different members of the LGBT community. Today we are going to be talking religion, and Starchild, our co-host, is going to be running that conversation. So sit back and let's have some fun.
All right. Yeah, so I guess I wanna start by just creating just some space for us to kind of get into our bodies, because part of my experience as a queer person, as a queer spiritual practitioner, is that in religious spaces, I've often operated in places where people were not in touch with their bodies, and that kind of tends to be the case in the kind of cis heteronormative culture, where religious space is like about ideas instead of bodies. And so, yeah, so I just wanted us to take a moment to kind of notice in our bodies right now, if anyone is feeling any tension, or especially when we hear the word religion, that can be really triggering for queer folks. A lot of us have had really painful things happen because of religion. And so what I like to do when I'm kind of grounding and tuning into my body, I use a type of breath that I call straw breath, and it's just breathing like you breathe like you're breathing in through a straw and blowing out through a straw. And so I want to offer for us to just do that, or you can use whatever breathing thing that you do. I'm just going to do that a few times to kind of get myself centered, and then we'll begin our conversation. So I'm going to start with just a straw breath. And I want to take a moment. I'm just going to shake out of my body any kind of anxious feelings that I have, any kind of residues of energies that I don't want in there. I'm just going to shake it out. It's wild, Shockie. There is a rainbow like in your Zoom window, like over your right shoulder. Like, yeah, from the window, like somehow it made a rainbow or something, or it looks like that to me anyway, which is rad. Cool. Well, yeah. So, how's everyone feeling? Are we feeling good in our bodies? Are we ready to go, or do we need a little more, or what do you think?
I'm good.
Lexi, you're on mute.
Yeah. Hi.
Cool.
Yeah, it's my first time on this kind of podcast, so I wasn't sure if we're all able to keep our microphones unmuted.
Yeah, as long as it's not a distraction.
Interference.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Hi. Awesome. So I'm glad to be here. Thank you so much, Shockie. And shall I call you Starchild? See, that's what we've got.
Yeah, right. Because I go by multiple names, but yeah, I'm Starchild in this space. Cool.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, what I was thinking is, and tell me if this sounds cool with you, Lex. I was thinking of starting out with maybe if each of us can share like a little bit of our background and just a little bit of backstory and what what it was like to grow up as a queer person in a spiritual context, if that feels okay and feels like something that's okay to share about. How what do you think about that? Or would it be better to start off a different way?
That sounds great, Starchild.
Yeah, I'm in favor of that too. Let's
Okay, cool.
let's learn a little
Yeah, that
bit
sounds
about
perfect.
who's in the room and what threads we might have in common that might help us open into hearing what the themes are, because I imagine there's some emergent themes, like I think Adrienne Marie Brown, I think it was, in their book Emergent Strategy, talks about how there's like one conversation that only the people in the room can have. If it were anybody else, it wouldn't be the same conversation. So I'd love to hear about, where everybody's been and start to listen for like what those conversations are, what those themes are that are asking to speak through all of us today.
That's awesome.
But I don't want to start. I want to listen.
Cool. So I guess we can just open it up to everyone who's here who would like to share just some of your some. I'll go first. Yeah. So so I grew up Southern Baptist.
You're breaking up. You gotta walk closer to the house.
In a
Starchild.
Sorry about that, y'all. Okay, so I'm just gonna stay in my house close to the router, and that'll be fine. We're not gonna walk around in the woods anymore because technology has its limits. So just once again, I grew up Southern Baptist in a moderate Southern Baptist family, and my family was very vocal about kind of feeling a sense of like that we were in battle with the fundamentalists, and so that became a big part of my journey and my understanding of myself is that from the very beginning, religion and spirituality were a place where there were people doing battle and arguing over ideas and in a sense that the bad guys are winning, basically, was the sense that we had within my family, within the Southern Baptist movement. And so that really, just shaped my understanding of religious authority and how Jesus was positioned, in my religion, how Jesus was positioned. When I read the stories, like I was like, Jesus ain't down with the religious authority. Jesus was protesting it, was ridiculing it, and then ultimately got killed because the religious authorities didn't like what he had to say. And so that so that's been a big part of my understanding in my spiritual journey, and I really feel like my queerness itself has been a huge part of my spiritual journey, because one of the biggest things that I've discovered as I've gotten older and learned more about my body and understood my gender identity better, and just had all of these ways in which I've come out of the closet, because I was closeted for much of my life, is that a lot of mainstream religion in our culture is very out of touch with the body, and even has this kind of attitude of suspicion towards the body, when actually what we need from spirituality is to feel at home in our bodies, and to have our bodies be involved centrally in what we're doing spiritually. That's what I believe. And my queerness really informs that, that if I'm, for instance, like right now, I'm look like myself, the way that I understand myself. I have a little bit of eye makeup on. I have my septum ring, and I have blue and pink bracelets on. And that's part of my gender queerness, but showing up as my authentic self, I feel like I have a much richer connection with the divine than when I'm repressing myself, and when I'm pretending, and pretending, like playing along with you know patriarchal religious language, and just doing what everybody else is doing because I'm scared to like do what I think I'm supposed to do. And so for me, queerness has been a huge formative part of my spiritual trajectory. And I'm in a place right now where I'm actually an ordained United Methodist pastor, but I'm actually planning to give up that ordination, because what is created for me is I've been in some situations where Methodist church officials have come after me, because of things that I've said that have been just kind of mystical and weird, online. And so they called my work. They don't. I'm not officially under them in terms of my work environment anymore, because I'm not a pastor anymore. I'm a counselor. And so I'm going to be removing myself from that oversight, because there are things that I do, and increasingly, as with the anti-trans bullshit going on in our country, I'm going to be getting more vocal, and more out there in terms of my activism, in terms of what I'm doing. And so I'm going to be doing that. And I just, God bless the United Methodist Church. I just want them to know that they're not responsible for me anymore, and they don't need to come and police everything that I'm doing. And so so I'm going to be shifting away from that, but I still, very much understand myself to be a spiritual practitioner, and I'm wanting to create spaces for people to experience their bodies and to feel grace in their bodies. And that's what I feel like the way I understand my version of Christianity. And I really I'm not even attached to calling it Christianity, to be honest. I don't care what it's called. But the thing that I'm looking for is feeling in my body that I'm safe and I'm loved, and doing practices that help me feel that way. Because when I feel that way, I treat other people well. And that's how I've distilled. That's how I understand the message that I get from reading the New Testament. In Christianity, like there's a lot of like really minor things that people get tied up in knots about, that are culturally contextual. But when I look at the basic, when I boil down the message of that I find in the New Testament of the Bible, it's that grace is what helps us to treat other people well. And so, like when we feel loved, we love others, and it's easier to do that than when we're on the defensive all the time, and we feel like we're being judged. And so that's kind of like I'm wanting to create judgment-free spaces where people can feel grace in their bodies, and whatever that looks like. And it's going to be outside of the realm of the institutional church, because I tried to do it in the institutional church and it didn't work. So that's my story.
Okay. Rachel, do you want to go next?
Forgot I was on mute. So, as for me, I grew up in Texas, born and raised, born into a Catholic family. And after my mom passed, my father moved me down to South Texas, where his family was. And he met a woman, and they got married, and her family is Baptist. So it was really hard growing up, being who I actually was. I wasn't allowed to. My parents had found something, I don't remember what it was, maybe a letter or a note or something, to this girlfriend that I had, and they went ballistic. And so basically I had to just stop that and be who they wanted me to be and who the church wanted me to be. I couldn't, even all through high school, I think maybe 2 people knew about me being gay. And it was just really hard doing that, especially in Texas. And, not many people come out there. They had, we had to hide who we really are or were then. And yeah, but like you said, it is just trying to be who you are is hard when when you have a family who's constantly going to church and you're being drugged there. And I basically only went, because I was told to, or because just to get away from home, because I wanted to see if I could actually be myself. But in with the church people, but I could never get myself to tell anyone because I knew what would happen if they found out that that I'm a lesbian. So basically, I had to go through life, being with men and, married a man. And we have a beautiful daughter together. We're now divorced. We've been divorced for quite a while. And even my father, still to this day, he won't talk about it. And we haven't spoken in almost 2-3 years, something like that. But he won't accept me. Some family, when I finally came out, some of them accepted me, others didn't say anything. So as far as the religious part, it is pretty hard to, be in a church, and whether it's one church or multiple churches, that you've tried to be yourself, but you can't, simply because they come down on you, or even if they don't know, they throw out messages in their sermons, stating that it is a sin and we're going to hell and this and that, which I don't believe. So I just stopped going altogether. I stopped believing. Quite honestly, I don't think I ever did believe. Because I just felt like, if this God supposedly, and no offense to anyone, but if this God supposedly loves us all, why is he allowing all this hatred towards us? Why is he allowing all these people murder our people? Why is he allowing, the country, the government to come down on us, and especially with the trans community? And a lot of it also with that going together, religion and the government, they all agree that our people aren't supposed to be who we really are. I think that's it.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. Yeah, I mean, I feel that pain, like I feel it too. And it's really hard. There's nothing like I'm not going to try to say anything to try to make it better because
Mhm.
it's just bullshit.
I mean, as well, being brought up in the, Baptist, church,
Yep.
and
Oh yeah.
it's hard. Oh, it's really hard. So I was like, I
Oh
just
yeah.
dealt away with it all because I just couldn't do it anymore. I got tired of hiding who I was.
Absolutely. Is it okay to ask a question I'm curious about?
Yeah, but
Rachel, do you have activities that you do that you feel like are spiritually nurturing outside of institutional religion?
no, not really. I mean, I've just do I don't even know how to explain it. It would just be there, breathing, deep breathing, and just try and do some kind of meditation on my own. Other than that, I really have nothing.
Cool. I mean that sounds great though. That not wanting to be contradictory, but yeah, I mean breath work and meditation, like that's kind of Those are two of my my most important practices.
Yeah, they're every night when I go to sleep, I have to play this meditation music. Otherwise, I can't sleep. And I literally have it going all night
Oh
because it
yeah,
just helps me just relax, whether I'm asleep or not. Uh, but yeah, I wake up and
yeah.
it's still going, and I'm like, I just lay there. I'm like, I just don't want it to stop. And then my son goes and turns it off. I'm like, hey. So, but
Hmm.
yeah, that's something that I do. And yeah, if I don't have that going when I'm trying to go to sleep, I can't sleep.
Mm,
So sweet. Yeah, when
Thank
I'm definitely going to touch in on the sound part of things too, when I talk about how I orient in the world. And I'm also curious, Rachel, and I don't know if it's for now or not. I'm curious, Rachel, if on your journey with queerness, if you have found communities that feel accepting, embracing, supportive, and yeah, have you been able to find those places where you feel accepted?
I have friends, who accept it, and of course, most of them are, queer as well. And the ones who are not just accept you, period. But as far as any other community, no, not really, not at all.
Thanks for
I mean,
sharing.
I'd like to, I just don't know where to start or where to look
mm.
really. And it's just without having transportation at the moment, it makes it hard to get around. But I'd also
Oh
need
yeah.
one if I'm able to find one, and if I were to able to catch a ride, um, I would need something where I can take my son. He's autistic, and so I would
Mm,
have to take him with me.
Thank you.
yeah.
Yeah,
Thanks.
thanks for
Thanks so
sharing.
much, Rachel.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Who would like to go next?
I'll go next.
Cool.
Robert, I'm Jewish. I was born in 1963, and I was born in a hospital. At that time, I think it was typical for a mother to stay in the hospital for almost a week, even if she had no complications at birth. The third day of my life, I had my foreskin removed in a Jewish ceremony called a bris. It's usually performed by a member of the Jewish synagogue, but my parents had a surgeon do it instead in the hospital because they thought it would be safer. And I always thought that it should have been my choice whether I wanted a foreskin or not. And also it should have been my choice whether I wanted to be Jewish or not. Removal of the foreskin in a boy is a symbol of your commitment to being a Jew. When I was a little older, I found that the Jewish institution, the synagogue, was really ignorant about what makes a good activity for a child. So the synagogue I went to, the services were 80% in Hebrew. So I didn't know Hebrew and I was bored. The services were typically 3 hours. And at 7 years old, I could barely sit still for 5 minutes. So I really didn't like going to the synagogue. And then when I was 10 to 12, I took bar mitzvah lessons, and I was starting to be oppositional and expressing my will. My biggest question was, if God was so great, why did God need people to pray to them? And why did I need to say all these prayers about how great God is? I was so I was so confused as a child. I also took my religious book and threw it against the wall. And it was really the first time I was expressing my will. Now, as an adult, what's more important to me is my higher power. I have a connection with nature and with my creative inspiration for doing art and writing. So that's me.
Yeah. I feel a lot of resonance with that, Robert, even though we have different, religious backgrounds. But yeah, I remember I had a moment, I didn't actually throw the book, like I didn't throw the Bible itself, but when I was in college, I was supposed to sign a thing that said that I believed that the Bible was perfectly inspired and blah 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 to be a leader in a Christian ministry. And I tore the piece of paper up because I was actually going to sign it, but then my friend said, "You can't sign that because you don't believe that." I mean, ex-friend. And I was just like, "Well, fuck all of y'all," and I tore it up. But so that was a visceral like connection I had with what you're saying, and also just like the idea of um yeah, I mean, whatever the hell it is, like it feels like there's a voice, in nature and a voice that gives me my poetry, and that's kind of what I feel like going with, as opposed to like some patriarchal asshole who's like mad if we don't like worship him the right way or something like that. Um, but yeah, so thank you, Robert. Does anybody have questions or responses to Robert?
Thank you, Robert. I think that I do, but I'm kind of holding. I'm holding
Okay.
till later.
Yeah.
All right. I take it Lex is trying to go last, so I guess I will go.
Yeah, go Shockie.
So my journey with religion, it's been a rocky one. And I now say that I'm more of a spiritualism, but not in the sense of the word from the 80s with ghosts and spirits and things like that, more in the sense of knowing a higher power. Um, I was raised Jehovah Witness by a foster family that was extremely abusive. And when I went to the congregation about my abuse, they kind of just, used the Bible to tell me that I was supposed to deal with it, which I didn't like. And I saw other forms of abuse among other people in the congregation, and it just didn't seem like religion was protecting any of those people. After getting out of foster care, I was kind of, my mother wasn't really religious. So I kind of went down my own path. And I did a lot of stuff with the YMCA, which when you're one of those children that are kind of just running around, people try to, back in the day, they used to try to like pick you up and make you part of their community. So I had people take me to the Baptist church. And it was a lot of the same, just a lot of hypocrisy that I saw within the church. Um, like sitting with, a deacon or a pastor, and they're talking bad about another church member, and it just didn't seem like the right place to be. But I met a kid named John when I was in high school, and yeah, I would say he was like your all-American like kid. He played sports, but he always carried a Bible, and he was super Christian. And one day I just sat down and talked to him. So I was like, how do you do that? Like his life was just devoted to that. And in that he was like, you have to find it for yourself. And because he was able to do it, I sat down and kind of did my own Bible study, read through the Bible. And then when I got into college, I went to a Catholic private college. So I went through and I read through the Bible again while I was there. I read through the Torah and I read through the Quran while I was there. And you realize that there's so many similarities between the differences, but everyone is arguing that they're right compared to the other. And it didn't make sense to me. And you always have those questions, right? We've all kind of said it, where you have bad things happen to you. You come to this like, well, why does God let it happen? And I had to find ways to rationalize and realize that in my mind, and I have. And I can't say that it's right or wrong, but I definitely think that a lot of our problem is that we tie religion up in people, and spirituality, and that relationship with the higher power is not supposed to be through people. And that's where the negative comes in, because you allow someone else to bring in their biases and their wants onto you. So again, even though I don't call myself religious, I do have my own spiritual, I pray, I meditate, and things of that nature. I think it's important, but I think, everyone has their own ways of doing it, and it may not even be religion. Some people may do yoga and that's their thing, or they might paint and that's their spiritual moment. And I think it's just important for everyone to have that outlet.
Yeah, thank you, Shockie. And I really resonate with what you were saying about just like all these different religions being like, we have the right answer. We're the ones who have the right answer. And I'm just like, can we just all have different answers, but like still be like support each other spiritually? Like the spiritual community have to like be unified around answers. And I'm just like, why does it have to be that way? I don't think it should. Like what would it be like to just be connected with other people who have, recognizing that everyone has their own journey, and that we just want to support each other in our journeys. And that's um a lot of y'all have been using the higher power kind of language, and I got into that in the 12-step world, and that's been a place that's been very really helped me to get unhinged from, like Shaki, you were saying, like the higher power being tied up in specific people, like specific authority figures, really um, getting into a place where like we can just support each other on our journeys, and not try to make people like us, or correct somebody else's journey, but just like if someone asks for help with some practice that they're doing, and I know something about it, I can share something about it, or not, like um but yeah, thank you for sharing that, Shaki. And I appreciate the specific things you're pointing out about religious authority. I just feel like religious authority is like the root of so much evil, like authority, religious authority specifically.
Yeah.
um
Look up information on the Vatican.
yeah, oh shit.
Yeah, so Shaki, I resonate with, growing up and being abused like that. I was abused by the stepmother, whom everybody just loved. She was a Jekyll and Hyde. And so one of the reasons why I go to church is to try to talk to somebody and ask for help. But because they all knew her, and her family was very well known in the community and the city, I couldn't say anything. I couldn't ask for help. Otherwise, it would have made it 10 times worse for me. And I was like, I was stuck. I did not know where to go, what to do. So I finally confided in one of my cousins at the time, and she told her parents, and they had a talk with me. And when my father picked me up from school, like the following day, I was the one that got in trouble. He got mad at me instead of her, because I embarrassed her with the family. So it was like, uh, so yeah, I couldn't even go to people at church to talk to them to try and get help. Not even with the deacon, with the pastor, with anyone, even though we lived blocks away from each other. And I know there was a few people that knew what I was going through, and they wanted to help. They just did not know how, without them getting in trouble, without making it worse for me.
Right. Yeah. My thing was that they sat you down and they read that honor thy mother and thy father, and all
Yeah.
that those verses, and it's just like you're using religion to control someone. And
Exactly.
even at a young age, you can realize when you're being manipulated. So, and again, I don't think it was the religion itself, but the people leading that religion that just were not pure at heart. That's just what happens.
Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah,
yeah.
fuck that. It's so toxic. Oh, I hate it.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing. There was something in what you said, Shockie, that like gave me full body chills. Oh, I know what it was. It was when you spoke about like perhaps the relationship with the higher power isn't meant to come through other people or primarily through other people. And I know for myself, I'll say a lot more in a minute about my journey. Part of my journey has been coming to recognize that the spiritual for me is very relational. And there's so much in my journey, in my ministry, that is about helping people understand God beyond culture, through energy, through frequency, through sound, through our relationship with each other, but before that, our relationship with ourself, our relationship with things around us. For me, it's been a lot of that awakening came through my relationship with plants, actually, which I wouldn't have guessed, would not have seen that coming when I was younger. But yeah, finding a lot about the way that God weaves, the way that blessings weave, the way that the world is through nature and through relationship with nature, relationship with music, relationship with people too. But yes, that's where I find the most pain and hurt and suffering. And that's where I find a lot of my ministry is about bringing relational skills to people. And that includes leaders in ministry, because like we've heard it here today, how many of us have been like deeply wounded in relationship with people and in relationship with community and in relationship with religious or spiritual community, the place that we hope to be able to go for refuge, to come together, to learn about God, to learn how to usher in a blessing path, to learn about conflict resolution. But like so often we don't get there in these organizations, or we haven't. Yeah, so let me see, that was a lot. I'm trying to think about, I guess I'll share a little bit more. I'll share some more about what my journey has been. I tend to be really bad at summaries, especially like lifelong arching summaries, but I made a couple notes about that. So I'll share about that. I'm also, I made some notes as we talked about themes that I heard from all of us. So I guess when I'm done, I'll check in if it's a good time to maybe speak some of those. And then through that, maybe we can see whichever one feels alive, or if there's stories that come up that we want to share about any of those topics. Or maybe there's even like one question that kind of pops up that that we'll see. I don't know, but those are some of my ideas. Oh, and there's another idea. Another idea that I have is I might offer a song at some point here. And I tend to do that on these kinds of calls because we're bringing up so much. We're bringing up so much. And I can feel those things in my body. And sometimes for me, I start to get overstimulated by words, and sound can be really helpful in kind of like in shifting consciousness, actually. So and kind of helping us sift through some of the things that are coming up that, and so, yeah. Okay, cool. So I'm Lexi, and let's see. I was raised Catholic. I was raised Roman Catholic. I went through confirmation. I did all the things. I was pretty good was a pretty good Catholic, you know, like I was like modeling the ideals and all those. I went to Catholic school. Actually, it wasn't even until I got out of Catholic school that I really realized just how much I had not been exposed to or taught about other religions or spiritualities. And it wasn't until college, well, when I got to college, I got exposed to a lot more of that. But I took a Buddhist class in college, and I was like, and around the same time, I came across a Rosicrucian text, and both of those just opened me up. They felt a lot more resonant to me. They touched some places in me that I had never really like felt in my journeys with Catholicism. And at some point, let's see. Okay, yeah. So I went through college and I was having a hard time really staying alive, y'all. And at some point I was just like so depressed. And I ended up going to a plant medicine ceremony with my partner at the time, who was frankly scared for my life. And those ceremonies, those gatherings, showed me the way. They showed me the way for me to get in touch with life in a way that I was willing to live. You know, it helped me clear out a lot of the depression, and it just set me on a different path. It infused me with some energy I hadn't had before. And so since then, I've done lots and lots of interfaith work. I've studied lots of different spiritualities. I've done lots of work with churches that carry plant medicine sacraments. I've been an advocate for harm reduction in those spaces, and I've served as a consultant to try to really bring more awareness of how to create spaces that are safe for everybody to evolve and transform, how to create spaces where there is community and leaders that are capable of handling conflict, that are capable of handling difference, that are capable of handling people who need to operate outside of whatever the authority seems to be in those spaces. And so through this work, I've really come to serve as a spiritual elder to people of all ages and religions and traditions. And that's a big part of what I'm doing on this planet, as much as at times I wish I could put it all down and just be like, I just eat and I sleep and I try to love and I try to be kind, and that's it, you know. Spirituality is like, you know, it calls me. So I guess I would identify out of necessity as a mystic, and because so many mystical experiences have happened to me. And let's see, but beyond all of that, it's like, for me, I kind of just consider myself like a custodian of consciousness. And you know, there's the consciousness that's on the planet already. There's what we do with it. There's how we hold it or how we reject it. And then at this stage in the evolution of the planet, it feels like there's all kinds of new consciousness like landing on the planet all the time. And so it's a lot to know what to do with. And yeah, I was wanting to, let's see. I want to talk at some point a little bit about some teachings that I've come across around consciousness and queer people, and the way that certain indigenous tribes recognize queer people in their communities in relationship to consciousness and the gifts that brings. And that's something that I'm hoping to offer to this space. A little bit more about that soon, if it feels right. But first, I want to talk about, I just want to say that for me, spirituality is where there's places of nourishment. It's not only what it is, but that's like what I'm looking for some things that nourish the spirit, nourish the mind, nourish the body, nourishment. So, I know there are many people who haven't been able to find nourishment in religious or even spiritual communities, because sometimes the harm just outweighs the healing. And I know that that's been the case for me at times. And I'm just looking, when that happens, I'm like, okay, where can I be nourished? Where can I be nourished? Where can I be nourished? And much like a lot of you have mentioned, for me, that has come through creativity. It's come through sound. It's come through song. It's come through plants. It's come through nature. It's come from things that are beyond words. It's come from things that are beyond cognition. It's come through things that really just like help my body soothe and replenish and restore and feel attuned to something that is beyond humans. Yeah. There's really beautiful moments of grace that come through humans too. But so my path often is, like I said at the beginning, through energy and through sound, through helping people think about God and think about what's happening by learning about energy and by experiencing sound that helps kind of bring in different consciousness or help clear out trauma and pain and wounds. All right, so I said a lot. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, thank you. And and I'm just thinking about all the ground that you covered and like ways of kind of weaving together things. And I definitely want to get into just the way that that queer folk are recognized as being spiritual practitioners in other cultures. Like I want to make sure that we get to that. The thing that I'm feeling really curious about in what you've shared and what some other people have shared, we use different language around it, like whether we're talking about God or a higher power or the universe. But I guess so. This is kind of a question, maybe for anybody for conversation, is like how has your understanding of God, the higher power, consciousness itself, the universe, how has it kind of evolved, in as part of your queer journey? Because I know that in my own experience, like I have such a different view of like what I'm even saying when I say the word God now than I did, when I was like a little evangelical kid.
Ooh, okay.
So I'll break down mine since I have to leave in a moment. But
Okay.
the way that I have found and I say how higher power, but normally I say universe, is looking at it through energy, right? Knowing that energy is not created nor destroyed. Well, a lot of times they tell you God wasn't created and there's no way to get rid of God. Like he's always there, he or she always there, omnipresent. All the things that they use to describe what God should be aligns with what energy is. And I think looking at it as energy has allowed me to see how there's really your own intentions in the world is what you receive. So if you are negative, then you're attracting negative energy. Bad things tend to happen. And if you are attracting good energy, then good things tend to happen. However, we can't control all the energy around us. So we may be positive, but if there's negative energy around us, we can still have bad things happen to us. And I think that allowed me to see like why bad things happen if there is a God, if that God was not making a decision, but really just that cluster of energy moving through space is what was making that decision. And then, when I started looking into like meditation and like the Buddhists do the I don't know what it's called, like the Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, the chanting and all that. I found that as your way of putting your intentions in the world. So most people call that prayer, but and so they say, well, if I pray and I pray and I pray and it happens, well, if you put the intentions out there, if you're putting an intention out there and the energy exists around that, that's the same. So you may think you're praying and you're getting answers to a prayer, but really you're setting your intentions out there and your energy is attaching based on that. And so that was how I was able to kind of understand this whole concept of what I call spiritualism and God. So, okay, I'll stop talking now.
Yeah, I love that, Shockie. Like I really resonate with that.
Yeah. Yeah, Shockie, that was one of the first things that really got me thinking differently too, was when I heard that energy is not created or destroyed, it only changes shapes and forms. Yeah. And I'm curious about, yeah, if you want to say more, I know you have to go soon, so maybe you can't, but about what your understanding of, I guess, kind of like what your understanding of God was before you were able to open into this understanding of energy.
So, unfortunately, through religion, what I originally thought of God as, because they teach you to fear God. They teach you that like there's this being, this all-powerful being that is there to punish you, and that you have to praise and always say good things about, which makes no sense to me. If you have someone who created you in their image, why do you need that image to validate you, right? And like the things that they teach you made no sense to me, right? If the opposite of God is the devil and the devil is supposed to be the knowledge of good and evil, why would God send you there as a form of punishment? Wouldn't the devil be doing something better than what God was doing because they wanted you to go there? You know what I mean? Like, so I just I had eventually had that thought, like, oh, God's the good angel, the devil's the bad angel, but this one is going to punish you. This one's also punishing you. And as a gay person, it was like, you don't fit anywhere, right? So because you try to be a good person, but you're still being punished.
Yeah. The punitive model is something that like I see a lot in religions. Punitive rather than like permissive or restorative, which I think is what the religions want to go for, is like a restorative place where we feel whole and nourished and like we're living our potential in a good way. But yeah, that punishment was really there for you, sounds like. I'm curious too, like Shockie, if I think what I'm making meaning of what you're saying is, and let me know if this is not your actual experience, but I guess I'm wondering, was there something for you through coming to learn about energy that helped you leave time, that those stories were like maybe like not ones that you could connect with, or they're ones that felt like they were problematic for you? And then when you started thinking about spirituality in terms of energy, did it kind of free you from those stories and allow you to learn about God in a different way?
So it's a battle, but one of the main things was looking into different situations that caused mass murder, things like 9/11, things like the Oklahoma City bombing, things that have happened in my own life, because a lot of people ask, if there is a God, why are these things allowed to happen? And if you look at God as a person, we're created in his image, sitting in a chair making decisions, then why would that allow that to happen, right? And even through energy, like you can have great energy, but if everything around you is negative, you're still going to have negative aspects happen. You know what I mean? Like you see like children that die young because of things, because of cancer, because of it's not basically an action. It's not a negative action. It's an energy, right? And it also explained, so for example, with the energy thing, it also explains why bad things happen for people. I apologize, but this is the analogy, and this is one of the biggest situations that helped me understand it. When you think of Hitler, you look at Hitler, and he was able to make this tremendously terrible thing happen. And you say, well, how does God allow that? Well, if it's energy, energy cannot decide whether the decision you are making is good or bad. If he were to put the energy out there, he's putting this positive energy into a negative thing. And so that, even though it is a negative action, the positive energy put behind it and the people that came around him with that positive energy for a negative thing allows it to happen, if that makes sense, right? Because energy can't decide like, oh, that energy you're putting towards me is bad. All it can feel is a positive energy coming from that person. So yes, it made a terrible, terrible thing happen. But if you look at it in a sense of how does God play into that, and you look into it as energy, you know what I mean? Like if I pray and I'm putting good energy into something like, oh, I wish someone's dog died, I'm pushing positive energy towards that, even though that is a terrible, terrible thing. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? I hope I'm not making Hitler sound like a good
Yeah,
person.
no. You're totally making sense. Like you're talking about synergy, you know, and what
And
I've really
entrainment.
resonated with. Yeah. So like what I've really not resonated with how you're talking, Shockie, I sort of have my way of kind of mythologically, I guess, narrating this. I don't know if this makes sense, but I think of God as being the ancestors with whom I am in alignment. So like the spirits, because what I believe is that when people die, um, the dead are still part of our reality in some kind of way. Um, and what where I am in my journey right now is I really feel in my body and experience in ways that I can't explain alignment with a certain set of ancestors who have gone before, and they're not just like blood, ancestors. They're not just people like who literally, gave me my DNA, but like just whatever the mystery is, the parts of consciousness that are resonating with how I'm being. And what I think happens is that, for an example of Hitler, there's a shitload of like, toxic ancestors who, just worship, you know, being, this military might, and having like this unified, fascist nation. And so he got a lot of alignment, with and just, had this particular resonant energy like with his people too, who just had their asses kicked in World War One. And so it all just set itself up for a terrible synchronicity. And I think the way that Shockie articulates the divine can be helpful in terms of uncoupling it from thinking that there's like somebody who's sitting on a throne all powerful and making decisions and not, and not fixing what's wrong, as opposed to thinking about it more like that divinity is kind of like a fire that catches wherever the hell there's fuel. And so like we can build this kind of divine synchronicity like for good, or we can build it for evil, and it's like it's going to resonate with who it resonates with. And so unfortunately in our country, we have a lot of divine energy being synchronized around, these just really paranoid fascist ways of thinking that are also, part of organized, fundamentalist or evangelical Christianity. And so I think, I think that the way I understand God, I think is that I think of God as the collective field that we're participating in, like the field of consciousness or something like that. But yeah, but in any case, that's the way that that I tell my little story, in terms of my mythological narrative, but it doesn't, I'm not trying to put it out there as something that anybody has to agree with.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. I think what I'm hearing is like the question is kind of, or at least the energy is kind of going towards, at least in my mind, like our understandings of God and potentially how that began and how what that evolved into. And I think, as you said, through a journey of queerness. So like for me, still, I know I began with an idea of God in a more patriarchal sense of like, yes, this human, this person, this man in the sky, this man in the sky. And then as I've evolved, I've encountered lots of like feminine wisdom traditions, and then as I've evolved in myself and come to open into my expression, the fullness of my expression, and realized myself as a person who travels the spectrum between and beyond polarities, my understanding, my understanding of God as this expansive force has really opened up. So I think, am I still with you or am I freezing? Okay, I can see you nodding. So for me, my internet connection is unstable, so I might have to pause in a second. But religion for me often was acknowledging a dual system with two different polarities, and people for a long time, for the most part, were stuck. We're in one spot on that spectrum, and that's the position that they held for a very long time. And then now we're seeing more people who feel more comfortable, who are, in my opinion, well, I'll wait on that, but we're seeing people be more comfortable traveling the spectrum between the two poles, and then in some instances beyond the two poles. So instead of saying every day you have to wake up and be in this spot, it's like, well, what do I actually require to live well and feel correct and feel aligned with my wellness, my aliveness, my spirit, with God force, with kindness, with love, with integrity, with whatever values I need to be holding? Where do I need to be between these poles or beyond these poles so that I can like embody that and live that? And it's not always waking up in the same place. It's not waking up in the same place doing the same thing every day. It's dynamic and it's evolutionary, just like the universe that we're living in. Okay.
I really like what you said, Lex, about just kind of polarities and moving around on, in terms of, because like, and I think I think I'm the way that I took that is that, so there are times when I really don't think there's anything else out there beyond us, like us, however we understand that. And I think that the us that is in the universe, like that we are God, or that, that I am, that you are, that the thing creating the universe is just us, in some sense, in the collective consciousness. And then there are other times when I really feel like, whoa, there is something beyond me and beyond even the collective. Like there's some depth to whatever this is that is outside of me, but it fluctuates. There are times when it's like, well, nobody else is, and it fluctuates how I understand God's, whatever this thing is, like what level of power it has, because a lot of times, like, I feel like, I mean, one of the biggest things that I constantly feel about, or have felt lately about God, is that God thinks that she's not really God, and that there's some asshole out there who is in charge other than God, and that she just has to deal with that. And I'm using gender just to express something metaphorically, but and so what the way that I understand what's going on in the world right now in a lot of spaces, particularly spaces that are going beyond institutional hierarchical religion, where people are discovering their own divine abilities, is that God is waking up in us in some sense. That this, whatever it is, this energy is realizing that it doesn't have to just stay with the same bullshit. You know, it's like I feel like the divine has perhaps felt limited and felt like, okay, well, I have to play the role, that all these people have given me, with their fucking institution. And like that's kind of some of the ways I narrate it. But I understand, in doing that, all we're doing is we're telling stories, and we're using a word, a label that is kind of arbitrary, like, and it's like, just because we, to capture something about reality that seems to be captured by that word, you know, but it's not like a dude. It's definitely not, a dude on a cloud or something.
One of the places that I've gotten to be restored is to feel gratitude and appreciation for the gift of being given a life and being able to given my time on earth. And I'm grateful for God for that. One thing which I learned from the gay community, which I am grateful for, is pride. And I learned about it by participating in gay pride many years and organizing it. And I'm also grateful for being gay, that when I see a man, I feel that I look and I feel attraction and I feel desire. And I'm grateful that I have that attraction. And I'm grateful that I can and that I have loved men. And I see that all connected with my gratitude for God and for the gift of becoming gay.
Yeah, I can feel that in your tones, Robert, and in that share. It really lands me in a good place in my body. I can feel it in my heart. It feels like really good soil in my heart. That's what it feels like. Mm-hmm. Thank you for bringing it back around to gratitude.
Yeah. So Rachel, I just wanted to touch base and see if you're still there. And I know, like, I want to be sensitive, like, about, I hope the question wasn't framed in a particular way that would have felt exclusive to you, because if your framework is, I don't believe in God, that's totally cool too, um and so, so I want to give space for however you want to, if you do want to weigh in with just how your understanding has evolved, of, if you're wanting to think in terms of the divine or the universe or consciousness or some other label, I want to give you space to, to weigh in however you want to, or to simply say, I don't believe in God, and I don't think that concept is useful. whatever angle you want to take with that.
For me, I a long time ago, when I was younger, I thought I believed. I, in a sense, I kind of wanted to believe, but mainly because it was, the parents and just, the church coming down on me and on everyone that, you have to believe in this, you have to believe in that. Being gay is wrong. Being gay, basically we shouldn't be here. We're going to hell. But as far as, my own stuff, my own personal stuff that I do for myself, I notice that when I'm out in nature, I feel peace. I feel like the world has been lifted off my shoulders. Every problem that I've had, I have some medical issues, and there are times when I've had to use a cane. And my ex-best friend, we had gone to a place out here called the Catwalk. I love that place. And it was funny because we get there and I'm hurting, but I'm with the cane and we have our kids and they're having fun. And after, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 minutes, she was holding the cane and I'm off everywhere and she couldn't even find me. And next thing you know, she comes across the bridge and I have literally climbed down a boulder down by the little lake that was there. So it's like, I just feel that, being there in nature just like really helps me. It helps calm me. It helps me release everything that I have in my mind. It helps my body to feel better. And she looked at me. She was like, "What are you doing down there? How did you get down there?" And she was like, "You were hurting. What happened? I have your pain here." I'm like, "I don't know." It just, I feel so much better. And I think, for me, that is what helps me. And, not religion, but just the universe and, nature and stuff like that. And writing, that helps. But yeah, as far as, God, I don't believe. I tried and I just couldn't, for many reasons. As I mentioned, just if there really is a God, why is he allowing, all this to happen to us, to our community? Why has he allowed the stuff that I have been through happen to me? Being abused, sexually abused, and, the list goes on. Why would this loving God allow this to happen to me and to anyone else that has gone through unimaginable things? Yeah, I don't know. I tried to believe and I just couldn't. I think there was some resentment towards this person that I don't even know, that I've never seen, because of this person that allowed it to happen when it shouldn't have. If this person's supposed to be loving and caring and accepting and stuff like that, it just, yeah. I don't know if any of that made any sense, but
Oh, I think it makes total sense. And I love what you had to say about just connecting with nature. And it's kind of like, what I'm thinking about as I'm listening to you and processing that, like, sometimes it just feels better to think of, in my own life, to think of the universe as just being, as nature, just nature creating itself, and having, when I think of nature, I think of it as having a label for what's going on around me and what consciousness is doing, that doesn't personify it, doesn't put it, doesn't create this image of one person, whether it's a mother or a father or something, but this huge field of, you know, energy and forces that are all happening at the same time. And I feel like being tuned into the land where you live and where you go, you know, like being just tuned into it and connected to it, like I think that's way more important than believing ideas about some figure that we call God. You know, like so I really I'm just I celebrate, you know, just the way that you're able to connect to the land like that. Like that's just amazing, you know, and so I'm really glad you have that and that you're making use of nature in your healing.
Because I know, because I live in Albuquerque and big city, and it's hard for me to really heal, going outside because it's busy, it's rushed, it's noise, and it's hard for me to connect to nature unless like out of the city. Um, but if I'm like further out, like there's Hamas, there's the catwalk, um, then that's when I really connect and I am able to let loose. I'm able to relax. Here in the city, I can't do that unless I have my meditation music going on. There are times we have it going all day and all night. We just have it on repeat. But yeah, nature seems to be the one that really helps me.
The nature. And there's the sound again. Every time you said when you play it, it helps you relax.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. Yeah. There's like, there's very particular sounds. There's very
Yeah.
particular sounds that bring forward very particular experiences for us. And there are sounds, right, that can help bring forward memories. There are sounds that can help bring forward joy. There are sounds that can help bring forward peace. And for me, there's something in my relationship with what is it that I'm going for here? Okay. So that's a really beautiful power through sound to be able to bring ourselves to certain places. It can travel us, and I found so much healing through sound. There's something that I have been wanting to touch on called, since earlier in this conversation, I'm just going to drop it here right now. And then I think it's going to maybe open up more again a little bit later. But it's this concept of entrainment. And I think that bringing up the concept of entrainment has something to do with, I'm still looking to kind of complete my answer from earlier. So I was like, God started as this like man in the sky. And then as I progressed, God expanded into so many other things, beyond one gender for sure. And then at some point beyond gender, right? But when I think of sounds, and I think of entrainment is, wow, I haven't reviewed this in a while, but it's essentially, maybe actually I should just look it up, y'all. Entrainment.
I've been looking it up as you've been talking.
That's
Okay.
what Google's for.
Yeah, I'm actually specifically looking for entrainment in music, which is a little bit different than the standard definition.
I know
Okay.
for me, there's different sounds that, help me. Because I grew up down in South Texas, down by South Padre Island. So we were always at the beach. So hearing the waves crashing and the pigeons flying around, there are times when I would go at night and nobody even knew that I went. So I would go sit out there, on the car or even in the sand, and just it being nice and quiet, seeing the stars up in the sky and hearing the waves just crash, and the smell, of the sand, of, the ocean, and I still hear it, even though I'm not there, but I grew up down there. And so that sound is always with me. So I love hearing that, the ocean. I love hearing rain. I love the rain. I always know when it's going to rain. I don't need, some app tell me, oh, it's going to rain, or the weather person. And my son will look at me. He's like, how do you know? I'm like, I just know. So, uh, but yeah, as far as being out in nature, it can either be quiet or, just, some birds chirping.
Yeah. I love how much was there for you, Rachel, specifically around sound. And you brought in a couple of the other senses too. And for me, I would like the way that I think about things is I would say like, oh, you have a sense-based spirituality, which you might not agree with, but that's how I would think about it because it sounds to me like there's something about at least sound and maybe some of the other senses too that help bring you somewhere within yourself that feels like soothing or connected to something that's important for you.
Exactly.
And
That's exactly it. Yeah.
yeah, and I know that Starchild also that you have spoken to about the importance of embodiment and that I feel this too, that I get reconnected to my spirit and to what feels nourishing often through my body and through my senses. And I know that this is at odds with so many teachings from different religions, or it seems to be at odds with some of the ways that the teachings have been interpreted or delivered. So often there has been this idea that the body, the material, the flesh is something that leads to sin. But like we can hear right now when we're talking about what connects us, that like there's these beautiful sounds, there's these like sensations that do bring us to these places of peace and of connection and of restoration, and that comes through being in touch with our body and being come through the senses. So yeah, for me, I have as far as like the some of my queerness has to do with like aromantic or like asexual periods of time. And despite all of that, there's always like sensuality. There's always a sense-based, there's sensuality that brings me into experience of connection. And so that starts for me through the senses, through what the sound, through feeling, through some of the things that like psychology tells us helps ground people when they're having a hard time existing in a body. You know, one of the fundamental exercises through the years has been like, if somebody's kind of going through an emergency, is to like have them name sense-based things. Like, what do you feel under you? What do you hear now? It's like through that connection, we're brought to I don't know how I want to feel this, how I want to end this sentence, but through that connection, we are something like we're brought to earth, and through a certain frequency of like relaxation that provides, then we can be reconnected to what really matters.
So
Yeah, for
Lex,
me,
what?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, okay, cool. What Lex? When I looked up that word entrainment, the thing that was most resonant in the different definitions that I saw was an idea of synchronicity. and kind of belonging. And I feel like that's what you're kind of describing is like when I'm tuned in to nature, to the sounds, the smells of nature, and having a sensory based spirituality, um, I feel connected to everything. Like I feel like I'm part of this, a larger synchronicity that's happening. And so I don't know if that is what entrainment is, but I also want to hear what you have to say now.
Well, with me, I am an empath. I pick up on everything. Um, and being a paranormal investigator, that also, brings everything in. So there's times when, a lot of times.
Wait, what? I didn't know this. This is great information. This is great information to know that you investigate paranormal. Okay, great. Okay.
But
I'm gonna let you finish, but there's a lot of excitement and connection around that for me.
I actually forgot that I was going to mention this. But, being an empath and being a sensitive, going to these investigations, I'm able to hear. I can feel them when they touch me. Sometimes I can see them if they're able to, if they have the energy. But
Oh,
yeah, and there are times when I'll tell them, if you need the energy, if you need more, if you can't get up from, the cameras or whatever toys we have, you can use my energy to speak to us. And being an empath after that, and even just going out, to the store or, a restaurant or something, it takes a lot out of me. So it's like I have to find a way to get grounded, to push all that away and, just focus on my family. Yeah. And so I'll have to put the music on or, just distract myself. But yeah, it's a
so
challenge.
you go to music sometimes to replenish.
Yeah.
Okay. That's really cool. I have some, it brings up a lot because one, like it's great to know essentially what I heard you just say is that you have developed some what I call clairs. So some people know like clairvoyance, where you can kind of see things that maybe other people don't see beyond. But there's also clairaudience, where you hear, claircognizance when you know, clairsentience when you feel a lot of it in your body. There's actually clairgustance, and then I never really know what the nose one is called, but essentially where you smell things, where you're smelling energies is how I talk about it. You're smelling energies, you're smelling spirits. And so this just like opens up a lot of my understanding about you, Rachel, to know that you are, like, I would say that you're like communicating with consciousnesses that are not embodied.
Yeah.
And so for me, that's also a form of spirituality, to recognize relationship with the spirit of things that don't necessarily have bodies. And so that's just a cool connection for me
like
to
here
have.
at home,
Yeah. And it
a
also,
lot of the times it's hard for me to relax and get grounded because one of the apartments, I live in an apartment, and there was a man before I moved in here. Catty corner, behind me, he was murdered. And he is still around. So he's always messing with stuff. And and I think, I have some attachments because I hear, and even my son, we hear these, different voices and people trying to talk to us and knocking on the wall 3 times, at 3 a.m. And I'm like, no, don't do this. So, but basically to get them to stop, I just tell them, stop it, behave. I'm done. Leave me alone. I need to rest. And it's funny because they'll stop. And there are times when they just want to be rambunctious and not let me sleep. And they, whoever it was, threw something off the table when we were asleep, scared the crap out of us. There's stuff that's gone flying off the top of the fridge, almost hit my son. Doors opening and closing. I've literally sat here and my son was taking a nap and his bedroom door literally, I saw it move like it was going to close, but it was like that much, before even closing. And I'm like, leave him alone. Don't wake him up. Yeah, it's like, it's hard for me to even relax
Rude.
here sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely have an embodied experience of being extensively empathic and those communications with things that not everybody picks up on all the time, and needing to be able to recharge from that too. And yeah, I love that you said you go to music for that. It also brought up something that I love to share, but cut me off if I'm like hogging the airspace right now. But it's something that I was reading about. I think it came from a book called The Body is Voltage, or Healing is Voltage. I think it was Healing is Voltage. And it was this idea that that's based on science, I think physics. Okay, it's this recognition that I'm hearing myself. Why is that happening? Okay, now I'm not.
Oh, maybe if other people can mute.
Okay. It's this recognition that there are activities that are electron gaining, and then there are also activities that are electron stealing. And it was basically teaching us how the number of electrons that we have, I guess, in our cells, directly relates to the ability to heal, and to be healthy. And this is I'm trying to paraphrase a much larger book, but it's this idea that like when we have something that needs to be healed, there has to be a sustained voltage of a certain amount of electrons that enables that healing to happen. And it has to be sustained for a certain period of time. And then they go on to talk about essentially how all of us have voltage. We all have our energy fields. We all have voltage. And there are activities that we can do to bring more electrons into our system. And then there's also activities that we can do that drain them. And then there's also anywhere we go, the way that energy flows, it's like what I was starting to wonder about in this book is like, we can go and be around people or around disembodied spirits that need energy. And if we have been cultivating all of these electrons, the way that energy moves is that whatever has the most like force, whatever has the most power, it flows to other places that need that power. And so if you're cultivating a lot of electrons and you're in spaces where a lot of electrons need to be stolen by other people or by other things, like we can actually give away our electrons. And this is some of how I was thinking about like, oh, I get drained of energy. I spend all day doing these activities to gain electrons, and then I give them all away, and then I need to go get more. And it was just this idea of like, how do I keep filling myself up in a way that can help me be healthy? And so I was looking at this list of activities, these electron gaining activities, and I don't remember all of them right now, but I think like I know that like walking around barefoot on grass is helpful. And they even went to as far as to say specifically like even wet grass gets you more voltage. So it's been years since I read this, and I am a little bit scared to see how sloppily I have conveyed these ideas. But if anything, I hope at least it leads people to say like to think about energy in terms of voltage, to maybe go find this book, that this literally be helping ourselves replenish.
As a writer and a teacher, I noticed how much myself and my students relied upon a sight. And I started about 10 years ago, trying to awaken in myself and my students the other senses. I have a lot of exercises to wake up the ear, some even for the nose. And last time I did an exercise to wake up to the nose, I brought perfumes. And there were 3 people who would not smell the perfume. So they weren't willing to explore another sense, and that was okay. And last week, I did an exercise on ESP, which was telepathy. And the students were willing to do it. And my next ESP activity will be on telekinesis, using the mind to move objects. There's a documentary on Tubi called The Fifth Dimension. And one of the elements, what you talked about, Rachel, is empathy is explored in that, but trying to make the students to explore other dimensions besides just with their eyes. And it's a good activity, and it'll make people's writing more vivid. So I'm going to continue with that.
Yeah, thanks for doing
That's
that.
awesome.
I love that so much. And I love that so much because for me, it's like you are you're like you're carving new connections in between different things. And we work on developing these senses, and that's part of, I think, what helps people expand into not having to stay stuck on one part between the poles, like I was talking about before. It's like you're enabling people to expand into more of all that is, and that's so cool. Thanks for doing that.
So, Lexi, I wondered if you could share, we talked about you just having some history about how queer folks in other cultures, like throughout time, have been seen as actually more qualified to to be spiritual practitioners, and that's sort of some of what I'm hearing, and as Robert and Rachel are sharing, and just there's something about being in touch with your body, being a sensual person, that if you're going to have like a healthy spirituality that isn't disembodied and toxic, then having people who are in touch with their senses, like that's really cool. And so I don't know if that's a good I was trying to segue, kind of pivot to that. And then I'm also noticing, Shockie, or
Yeah.
did you want to add anything? Or
No.
okay, cool.
Okay. All right. So throughout the years, I have heard and haven't gotten as far into the research on my own as I'd like to, but I've heard people mention, like in a really beautiful way, I've heard people who work with indigenous tribes and wisdom traditions starting to bring forward this idea of two-spirit. Have any of y'all heard of like the two-spirit?
Yep.
It's like this idea that and maybe one of you can even say it better, but this idea that like one body can hold more than just one spirit that is seen as feminine, or one spirit that is seen as masculine. And yeah, so people have mentioned that the two spirit, that people have always, that the two spirit has always existed. This is kind of what the narrative's been. It's like everybody stop being so surprised that there are queer folk in the world, because this isn't a new thing. Okay. It's just like something that like y'all haven't figured out like how to have respect or acceptance for in this culture at this time. And so like I said, I need to do way more research about all of that. But one of my favorite books is called The Spirit of Intimacy. It's by Sobonfu Somé, and it's ancient African teachings in the ways of relationship. And so just a little bit of a background, Sobonfu Somé is the life partner of a shamanic elder known as Malidoma Somé, who passed out of a body actually in the last couple of years. And they were with a tribe. I might not say this tribe's name correctly because I haven't visited them myself yet, but Dagara, D-A-G-A-R tribe, D-A-G-A-R-A tribe in Africa. And when I was reading, well, first of all, I just want to give thanks for both Sobonfu and Malidoma Somé. Malidoma has done a lot to bring this idea to America, this concept that mental illness is, as we see it in America, is actually in some ways just because it's actually just not being, it's because we don't have enough education around energy and what to do with it. And so a lot of times what is recognized as mental illness in our culture, which by the way, being crazy is a cultural construct that differs across in different places. Like I could do something here today that most Americans would say that is absolutely crazy. And then I would go over here to this tribe over here and they would be like, this is great spiritual information. You just need to learn a little bit about energy, about how to hold it like this and like this. And okay, now there, it's a gift to all the people. Thank you so much. Malidoma was one of the first ones to really bring that idea to America. And I still think that like, it's really just a seed that he's planted, that I'm like doing what I can to water it so that we can all, learn how to claim the gifts that are available to us and work with energy well and be able to give our gifts to society. And so he carries that message. Sobonfu was talking, she has a chapter in this book that I mentioned. And the chapter, I wish I had the book with me right now, but the chapter is all about queer folk. And it talks about how in their culture, they recognize these humans who, how does she talk about it? She's recognizing that queer folk in their culture have always been recognized as gatekeepers to consciousness that isn't fully understood and isn't like the mainstream. So it's not like fully landed on the planet. Oh, I'm just noticing these messages. Okay, cool. So basically they're gatekeepers to areas of consciousness, and those areas of consciousness, the ability to enter into those areas and bring back information, bring back creative ritual, bring back ways to work with energy that are not what the mainstream, not what everybody knows how to do. Like they are essentially, they have the ability to open the gates to go get this information that seems out there, because it is out there for so many people who don't have the key to the gate and don't know how to navigate these territories of consciousness, of spirit, of creativity, these foreign territories in a way that not everybody has access to, but there's like treasures that need to, and I'm getting into my interpretation of it now, but there's treasures there that need to be brought back. They need to be brought to the people so that the people can find their way through challenging situations in ways that are beyond what they've known how to do on their own. So in that tradition, the queer folk have these revered and honored positions as people who can navigate in places that most people can't, in order to bring information and gifts and wisdom that help everybody. If you have the wisdom and they do in their tribe, to recognize a person's proper position in society. And so much of what I see happen in America, and maybe beyond that, but most of my experiences here in America, their proper position in society, because it's misunderstood, because it seems foreign, because it seems scary, because it seems outside of what has been known before, for lots of reasons. But the fact of denying somebody their position puts them in a position of having to fight to be recognized in their position, which takes a lot of energy away from being able to serve in your position. And I've had people throughout the years try to tell me, like, you don't need to be recognized for you to do what God put you here to do. You don't need to be recognized for you to show up and give your gifts. And I'm like, my experience is that it makes it a lot easier if people know what they're coming to me for, instead of being scared of what I'm offering, instead of trying to say, like, that's wrong, instead of there being this whole fight about what's happening. Like, it would be so much simpler if I could, like, hang a shingle like anybody else and say, this is what you come to me for, right? Like, you're having this problem and you don't know how to get out of it. You've tried all these other things. Well, here's my position. This is my position in society. I am here to bring things that seem a little bit unusual to you. And if I'm in my correct position, honoring what I'm meant to do, then you'll get what you need. You'll get what you'll need from this. So it's a little bit sloppy. There's a lot in there, but I'm going to turn it back over to you. I'm still just digesting. Like, I get really angry about the idea of having to, like, fight to be recognized in positions, appointed positions, in correct placement.
Mhm.
Based on what you're saying, a lot of it is by design, right? Because trying to find, you were saying, find your position in society. Society for us is capitalism, unfortunately. And it's either you find a way to make capital off something that you are able to do on your own, or you help someone else realize that for capital. And unfortunately, due to, like, the cost of living and things like that, a lot of us just end up selling our time for money so that we can survive. So if we learned how to harness those energies and things like that, that would be a breakdown of capitalism, right? Essentially, if everyone knew what they were supposed to be doing in society, we would have socialism. I'm not saying I'm for or against it. I'm just saying, like, that concept that everyone does what they need to do and just share it, socialism. So I think that's part of the reason why America has the issues that it has, because we get put in this box. You have to follow this. You work 40 to 8 hours a week, 80 hours a week, whatever it is. You get the house, you get the kid, you get we're boxed into that through capitalism.
And what I really find in queer community is the capacity to transcend that, to have a kind of subculture, a chosen family, where we're sharing gifts with each other, and really, I mean, creating kind of a new society, like a world that doesn't have to, like, have the market as its kind of central reference point. Like, I think that's one of the gifts of, and of both in the sense of, like, queer people being in touch with our bodies, but also queer people knowing what it's like to be excluded, knowing what it's like to be just continuously disrespected and, gaslit and all this other shit. Like, it's like the people that I feel safest around as spiritual practitioners are fellow queer people, that and that's what I've really discovered is, like, that, you know, so many of my influences and my mentors have been queer people, you know, like in terms of my journey of being a spiritual practitioner. So yeah, so thank you for that, but all of y'all. So does anybody we're gonna need to wrap up. Um, does anybody have anything you'd like to say, like in response or in closing? I think that this Zoom channel is going to be used for something else in about 5 minutes. So,
I have
so if
one
you
more
have
thing
a final thing, great.
I'd like to share. There's a poetry form called persona where you can explore your identity and at least two parts of it. It was first created by Patricia Smith with a poem called What It's Like to Be a Black Girl, and she explored what it's like to be Black and what it's like to be a girl. And I did my persona poem about 3 years ago, and mine is called Human Bear. So I explored what it's like to be human and to bear, and I've become, for several friends, their bear spirit.
I love that. And
Awesome.
you know what? I have a bear on my shirt right now because one of my so Lex was talking earlier about having multiple spirits in one body. I I have 7 that I've identified that are part of me, and in the third spirit that associates with me, I call him Bear, because
Mm.
he's the wild animal part of me, and also Bear, like in a gay sense too, like just being kind of hairy, and at different points in my life I've been bigger, you know, um, and yeah, that's so cool.
Mhm. Fair.
Obviously, I wanted to talk about the outline anthology and the voices of our LGBTQ community. You can get your copy on redorgreenbooks.com or from any of the contributors. Robert is in there. I believe Starchild is in there as well. I am in there.
Yep,
So
I'm in there.
yeah, definitely get your copy. And if no one else has anything, I just want to thank everyone for coming for the Out Loud podcast. Lex, thanks for guest hosting with us today. Rachel is our new host. I didn't get a chance to introduce you to Starchild, but they are our new hosts and will be joining us each week. And otherwise, thank you all.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Yeah, thank you so much, y'all.
It was
Good
great
night,
talking to
y'all.
everyone.
All right. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you.
All right, perfect. Lots of love.
Bye.